The local history feature is brought to you by Gravity FM in association with Your Heritage, awarding funds from the National Lottery. See www.hlf.org.uk.
I'm sitting in a beautiful place today. I'm at Easton Walled Gardens, and I'm talking to Ursula, Lady Cholmondeley, who actually, does just about everything, I think. Would you like to tell me a little bit about the history, please, Ursula?
This site is a very old site. It goes back to the Domesday Book, and I think the original number of people listed in the Domesday Book coincides with the number of people who live in the village today. So that'll immediately give you some idea of how little has changed in nearly 1,000 years. The gardens and house came into the Cholmondeley family in 1592 when Sir Henry Cholmondeley bought the manor of Easton, and in it was listed, we have this original conveyance, that was listed in there, meadows, orchards and gardens. So we do know that there's been a garden on this site since at least that time. For the intervening 400 years until now, the Cholmondeley family have handed the property on father to son. So our children are the 14th generation of Cholmondeleys to be brought up in the village. And over time the house has evolved, and so by the middle of the 19th century it was a large country house, and at the turn of the 20th century was entertaining people such as the future President Franklin Roosevelt, whose parents were friends of the Cholmondeleys, and he visited several times here, and he loved their site so much that he took measurements and took them back to the house that he was building in America. And you can still see today some similarities between his house and the house that used to be here. The decline and fall of this great house started, as it did for many houses, in the early 20th century when the current owner, Monty Cholmondeley, went off to war and was killed in the trenches Christmas Eve 1914, as were 5 of his near relations throughout the First World War. And the result was that by the end of the First World War, the house had been used as a convalescent hospital, and his family was much reduced, and then death duties were imposed, and the house started a very long decline, which was hastened by the Second World War, when 2 para, who were very brave men, were stationed in the house here, and they were very brave but very wild, and some of the lads were no more than 18, 19, and they used to let rounds off in the house, and they threw grenades into the greenhouses. And so by 1950, when the lead was stolen from the roof, the house was just a wreck, and there was water coming in. People tell us there were stories of great big bees, swarms nesting in the roof and honey dripping down from them. It must have been an extraordinary sight. And tragically in 1951 the house was pulled down, and for the next 50 years the house, and indeed the whole village, really became a sleeping beauty. Things started to grow up, brambles came around it, and so by 2001 the gardens were not passable in the summer because there was so much vegetation, and there were gates hanging off hinges. A lot of the roofs had fallen in, and every single building on the site was on the highest level of the at-risk register.
Tell me a little bit about the people living in the house at that time.
Well, we know some things we know a lot about and some things very little. And one thing that is really lovely is when visitors come to the gardens, if they say a member of their family used to work here or had some connection, and if they bring a photograph, it's even better, and we're starting to put together a picture of what life was like in the 20th century. There's definitely a strong element of following through the Downton Abbey story, actually, because of the house being a hospital in the First War. And I suspect when they get there with the Downton Abbey series, it may be that their house was occupied during the Second War as well. But I think the house itself had always been a centre for the community. So the lady that used to live in what is now our offices, when I first moved here, she can remember her grandmother coming over from Skillington to iron the crinolines. Well, she couldn't remember her grandmother actually doing that, but she can remember her grandmother telling her that she used to come over from Skillington to iron the crinolines. So that's a long time memory going back. She was called Iris Sowerby, and many of her family in the Duffin family still live locally and have connections to the estate. The family themselves, once the house was demolished, obviously they couldn't live there, so we now live in the village. And when the house was gone, it really took the heart out of the village. There wasn't a centre anymore for the village. And one thing that's been so great with the gardens is that it's re-established that. So most of the people who work here live very close, so most of them are able to walk to work, which is quite unusual in this day and age.
So was it very important for employment in the area?
Certainly, I think every big house was almost like a mini factory in its own right. I mean, we've been looking at pictures in our history book of the lineup of grooms who were here. So there were 6 grooms in the stables, for instance. There were at least 8 gardeners full-time, and there would be many more than that when things were quieter on the farm. And Ralph Duffin, who lived here for many years, he told me a lot about the gardens before he died. So he's been really helpful in just restoring and finding things. And he knew where every water source was and, things that had got lost under vegetation for 10, 20, 30 years. He was able to find for us. But he tells us wonderful stories about being aged 14, he was sent out to go and get the poppies out of the fields, and he thought he'd make his life easier, so he went along in the fields pulling all the heads off so you couldn't see there were any poppies. And the next morning the foreman called him and said, "What did you do yesterday?" He said, "I dug up all the poppies." But of course that night all the poppies had burst into flower again. He said he learned a big lesson that day.
Have we got to the time when Easton Walled Gardens became Lincolnshire's Lost Gardens?
Yes, I think by certainly 1951 there was a market garden here for a while when they used to grow flowers and vegetables that would go to the markets in Nottingham in the morning. And the great big long vine house had become a place where a gentleman who actually came and saw us the other day used to keep fish in there. He used to have an industry with ornamental fish, and that was his business, was selling ornamental fish, and he used the great big long vine house to keep his aquariums in. But all of this gradually failed to really give any security to the site, and gradually things stopped being used. And certainly by the time we came here in 1993, the site had been abandoned for a long time. So trees had reached 20, 25 foot. Anything that had originally been cut as a hedge had become a tree. There was elder all over the place, and ragwort was completely out of control, which, is fine in a small amount, very good for wildlife, but on the scale it had got to, it had completely covered the whole area. And where there wasn't ragwort, there was nettles. So it wasn't really recognisable as a garden in any form.
What made you decide to take it on?
Lunacy. Yeah.
I thought it was something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing sane. It was maybe sort of baby head from having small children or something. I have always been interested in the natural world, but not specifically in gardening. But when I got my own garden when we were first married, I did kind of get the bug, and I started doing the RHS, as it was then, general course, which was the first course that you might do if you were serious about gardening and horticulture. And I did that course for a while, and while I was doing it, I started looking more and more at the gardens and thinking, I'm sure we could do something here. But at first I couldn't see the point because it didn't have a house. And it took a long time for it to dawn on me that actually there's even more point, because what you can do is have somewhere that's lovely for everybody, and it's not competing with your private life. So if you let the dogs out in the morning, they don't rush over to a visitor and knock them off their feet, or something like that. It's a big garden as well, so it needs people in it, and it looks much better when we've got visitors in it. It sort of brings us alive. And we're also always very excited by the following February when we reopen for snowdrops, to see people again, because when you're doing it and you're so close up to the garden and you're doing it yourself all the time, you don't see the changes that our visitors do, and they come and they go, "Oh my God, I can't believe it, I was only here 18 months ago and you've done this, that." Or just the seasonal change is exciting for us to hear that people are noticing that.
What did you do first?
Well, we didn't make a list because there was so much to do, there was no point. So what I tended to do was use help that was available. So if someone told me, "Oh, I know somebody who's really good on trees," I would go, "Oh, excellent, we'll do that. We'll look at the trees, try and identify them." And we did that. It was an early start. The bridge itself, the beautiful ornamental bridge that goes over the river with them, that could almost be isolated in itself, and was an area that actually could physically start on without feeling completely daunted by the scale. So one of the first things I did was clear the turf off that, and just to put some gravel down on it, just so you could just show we'd been in a little place. And then gradually we were able to take the bridge apart and remove the trees that were growing out of it and put it back together again, because when the bridge was built in the 1850s, it would almost have come as a flat pack. You could get a catalogue that would show you different shapes of balustrade, and you could buy it in lengths and also involves some wading in the river to find the pieces that are dropped into the river. We found every piece but one.
I'm sitting in a very busy office at Easton Ward Gardens, and I'm talking to Mary and Landy. Now, what's it like working here in such a beautiful setting?
Busy.
Yeah, busy.
Do you get a chance to look up?
No.
No.
We wish we had more time to spend in the gardens, but we don't get the time. It's just busy from the minute we walk in until we go out.
You go to trade shows, don't you? Is this for buying, marketing?
Elizabeth and Lady Chumley will do the buying at trade shows for gift shops, and then my job is to arrange for them to go to trade shows, so we let people know within the trade industry that we're on the map.
We had a lovely 2 days at the group travel show.
We did.
The first time we've done the group travel show, 2 days at the NEC, and we were really, really pleased with the response that we got and the contacts that we were able to get. And we're going to follow up on those very shortly.
And you'll be bringing lots of tourists into the area?
Hopefully, we will be bringing a lot of tourists in. Our groups, we have around about 60 groups a year, but we're hoping that with some of these contacts, we're going to increase that number next year.
Landy, tell me a little bit about the organisation that goes into events here.
Okay, well, it's basically a team effort, going from sending emails out and approaching stall holders. And once we've got our list of people on board and people to demonstrate and bring alpacas and owls, etc. to the event, it's then down to the good old team here to prepare the grounds and the stable block and the facilities to ensure that we can hold it. So myself and Mary will be up in the stable block, hoovering and cleaning it up. It's now only just a hoover and a quick clean, where the first event it was still covered in horsey doodah. It's very much a team effort, and whatever's needed, then the whole team get involved. It's not a case of anybody has an attitude of that's not my job, I'm not doing it. We all pull together and we all get it done. Whether it's cleaning the toilets or hoovering an old stable block out, or running down the garden with signs for one of the gardeners to put up, just team effort, and that's how we get the job done.
Tell me a little bit about the sort of groups you get here.
Mainly gardening clubs and coach visits. Maybe a coach company will put us in their brochure, and then they'll ring up and they'll provisionally book to come here, put us in their brochure and then see what the response is. But just recently we've had 2 groups of Italian historic house owners come over, arranged by a travel company in Italy. And the second one was today. Very, very interested group, and I understand they're over here to see how we run our historic houses and gardens, and to compare them with Italy, and to also find out how grants and things that are available over here that may also be available over in Italy.
These are people that actually own their own
historic
house.
Yes. Ladies and counts and baronesses, but they were delightful, absolutely delightful.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Landy. I'm at Easton Ward Gardens, and I'm having a tour now. So who am I talking to here?
I'm Stephen Marsland, the senior gardener.
You're the senior gardener. And where are we exactly?
We're in the Pickery.
A pickery?
Yep.
Never heard of a pickery.
Well, you pick flowers from it, so it's a pickery.
Oh, I see. Oh, tell me a little bit about the maintenance of this.
It's quite labour intensive in terms of trying to keep it neat and tidy at different times. As you can see, we've got all the sweet peas, which are now starting to go over. But I will start to sow those in November, so get about a month off. The rest of the beds, all of what you can see in the beds apart from the dahlias is grown from seed. All that has to be done early part of the year. But once these come out, the bed's empty. We've then got to dig the beds over, mulch the beds, get into bed for the winter really, so that we can start all over again in April, putting everything out.
So are these just to look at, or do you actually pick them?
We do pick the flowers, yeah. We've got displays in the history room and the little bunches of flowers in the tea room. They all come from the Pickery. Yeah, so it's used.
I've never seen so many flower borders in one place. And there's an observation platform.
Yeah, that's to sort of, because there's no house anymore, that's to give the impression of what it might have looked like looking out one of the first floor windows in the house.
Are we actually standing in what would have been a flower garden?
No, this would have been a maintenance bit really for the gardeners. It used to be all walled in. See the 2 greenhouses we've got there? All of that used to be greenhouses, so 50 foot, if not more. And then there's a big long greenhouse along there called the vine house, which was the length of what's the Evergreen Walk now. And all this was walled in with sheds.
And what do you have in the greenhouses?
We grow tomatoes, gourds for the autumn displays, beans, and else we've got peppers, and a couple of melons that I grew from seed from a melon I bought in the supermarket.
How many gardeners do you supervise?
At the moment, 3.
Does that change? Does that vary with the seasons?
Yeah, obviously we need a lot more in the summer because there's a lot of edging and weeding jobs going on and just keeping on top of things. In the winter it's a lot more heavy work, but work that fewer gardeners can do.
Are these very old, the greenhouses?
As I understand it, they're Victorian, but...
They're an unusual shape, aren't they?
Yeah, they're sort of buried slightly into the ground to try and keep the warmth in. Of course there's these two, and they would have gone all the way along there. There's another greenhouse on the edge of the wall there.
And what's this building here?
That's just another shed. It would have...
It's a beautiful piece of work for a shed.
It had to look nice. The doorway through there used to lead to what's called the peach house on the other side. And so it was an inside way into the peach house to keep the warmth in, I suppose. Obviously now the peach house has gone, the door's been filled in. But it's here in the cottage garden to look like the frontage of a cottage.
It does look like the front of a cottage, and this smells glorious.
That's rosemary.
It smells lovely, that does. Were peaches big then? I mean, why would you have a whole house dedicated to peaches?
It was all about showing off. So if you could grow this stuff that was hard to grow, you had a great gardener. So you grow your peaches, you grow your pineapples, melons, things like that, just to show off, to try and get them in the winter.
I am looking at the most amazing view. What can I see here?
This is the walled garden. It's the view that they'd have had from the conservatory of the house. It used to be fruit and veg all round the walls, all round the beds. The paths that you can see in the crosses, they were as they were, except they would have been stone or whatever they were using. And so it would have been triangular beds filled with fruit and veg, but they would have had to have looked nice because of this view from the conservatory, from the house.
So fruit and veg in a formal arrangement?
Yeah.
And they'd have to look good to the eye?
Yeah.
That's quite a tall order for a gardener.
There'd have been statues and all sorts in there as well. All round the walls would have been espalier trained pears, apples, things like that. The 2 towers halfway up, one's called the apple store, one's called the tool shed. But then further up there's 2 more towers, both of which are now houses.
When are we talking about?
Over 100 years ago.
That style of vegetable gardening, wouldn't you say that is now back in fashion to try and make it look attractive?
It is. I mean, I remember seeing on Gardener's World and I remember thinking, what's he doing it in triangles for? Because to my mind, the way I think about it, I want things in squares with straight lines. And to use a triangle, you're sort of reducing what you can fit in. But, you know, obviously it's got to look nice. And people aren't having to grow food to actually survive now. So they can do it so that they've got fruit and veg out of the gardens.
It's more relaxed, isn't it?
They're not dependent on it.
Talk me through a year.
So we start in the middle of February with snowdrops, and they were one of the first things that we discovered underneath all the undergrowth was this terrific display of snowdrops that was just naturalised there. And so that was the first thing we did, was make the garden passable so that people could get in to see the snowdrops. And it still wasn't recognisable as a garden. It was still a terrible mess, but they did have these beautiful snowdrops in. And we've been adding to the varieties over the years and putting in small things like cyclamen and Iris reticulata, which are beautiful colours at that time of year. So we do 10 days straight of visitors then, and we have about 3,000 visitors for that week. And then we open for the season 4 days a week at the beginning of March. And we've done a lot of work planting a lot of bulbs. Because we're on limestone here, it's very free draining and not particularly fertile soil, which means that it's brilliant for meadows type flowers here, and that includes some of the smaller bulbs. So early in the season we have a lot of little blue bulbs and small white bulbs. We've planted a lot of small daffodils, ones that will go within grassland and look attractive in grassland. And then the season comes on with tulips, and then by the time we get to the middle of May, some of the old trees that were here are starting to flower, the laburnums and the lilacs, which is just beautiful, and the hawthorn coming out. And then high summer is all about sweet peas and roses and the cut flower garden. And by autumn we are into vegetables and the fantastic tomatoes that we're able to grow in the greenhouses, and dahlias. All the meadows get cut as well. It's a massive job. Cut everything with a modern Allen scythe, and then it's all raked into piles, just like traditional haymaking. And this is a great way of encouraging the meadow grassland to have lots of different types of flowers in it. And then we close at the beginning of November. Have a quick breather, have Christmas, then we're back again.
You're very well known for the sweet peas.
Yes.
Is that a big event for you?
Yeah, we do an opening for, I think, 9 days straight at the beginning of July for our sweet peas, because we grow about 75 varieties, and in September and October we'll harvest the seed and we package it up and we sell the seed. So we sell it in the shop here, but we also have an online shop which we sell sweet pea seed through. We're increasingly known for our sweet peas, and the reason we started growing them is just because we could. When there was a lot of demolition happening to the site itself, when we were trying to cut down trees and walls had to be taken down before they could be repaired and roofs were being put on, we wanted to do some actual horticulture, actually grow things. So we started growing hardy annuals, which are plants that complete their life cycle in 1 year. So if you sow them in the autumn and protect them a bit from the cold, they flower the following summer for a long time, but once they set seed they'll die. So you collect the seed and start the process again. And we grew quite a lot of hardy annuals, and one hardy annual we grew was the sweet pea. We've sort of never looked back. We had about 10 varieties to start with, and we're now on to 75.
At this particular time, did you get a lot of encouragement and support as you started to build it up?
Yes, the support from the village particularly has been 100%. People have been amazing. We've got some pictures in our history booklet that we were just looking through of how we started in the old packing sheds for the gardens, when we had a plastic rickety table on an earth floor with an old plastic urn for serving squash out of at 20p a time. There was a really great response from people in the village who've helped out. Most of them still work here, or they just support what we're doing, and we're very, very lucky with that. I think mostly people in the area have been really enthusiastic about it. That's been an exciting discovery as well, because a lot of the time you're asking people to believe in something that's not there, and to ask people to put their trust in you and say, oh, okay, it's going to be a great garden, I'll believe you when I look at this sort of jungle of undergrowth. It's quite a big ask for people who've paid to come around the garden, and it's very, very rewarding that they're returning now and saying, wow, I saw it before you did all of this work. And they and I get great satisfaction from knowing that we've delivered what we promised those early visitors, but also they can see where we've been because they remember.
So how long did it take you from that initial starting to clear the bridge to being able to look out and think, yes, this is going to be a great garden, because I can see it taking shape?
Well, I would say this season has been the first time that I would say we're now not just selling a site that's going to be a garden. It is a garden, and that's very exciting for us. The response from visitors this season has been unbelievable as well. People used to find it very interesting and they were fascinated by the history, but obviously there was nothing to really look at. It's now a fantastic experience. There's always swallows flying over, or there's bumblebees, and there's flowers, and just quiet places to sit and just relax. And that is a great thrill when people write to me and say, I just had the most relaxing afternoon I've had for ages. And I think, that's brilliant.
And habitats for wildlife, you've got quite a few of those.
Oh, well, I've personally been very keen to develop wildlife habitats, and so to run a fairly informal garden within the confines of some fairly formal structures. So the hedging and the walls allow us to be a bit more relaxed in the planting within that. And one thing that's been a great success is that when we first started here, taking down trees, the swallows was only one pair nesting in the outbuildings here, and there's now this year 6 pairs of swallows came back. And not only that, but we're now a staging post for swallows going north and south in the spring and in the autumn. And we know that because we only have swallows here, but the sky will sometimes explode with house martins and swifts, and they'll be here for maybe 24 hours and then they've gone again. They're collecting insects that have bred on the mature trees and the long grasses.
How many meadows have you got?
Well, there's different ways of maintaining meadows, and really the best way to maintain a meadow is to pick a certain time of the year when you want it to look really good and work hard towards that, because the whole maintenance regime works around that point. So in our cedar meadow is actually a spring meadow. The pinnacle of its activity is in May and early June, and then everything starts to brown off off there. The colour goes out of it because the last of the tulips goes over, the wild geraniums, the oxeye daisies. So that'll all be cut by late June and cleared away. So it then just looks like an extension of the lawn. But while that's happening, the summer meadows, which are on the terraces and over the river, start to come into their own. And they've got things like much later flowering things like scabious, knapweed, wild marjoram. And those things that could be flowering well into the end of August, depending on the season. We don't start cutting them until mid-September. Well, sometimes early September, it depends on the season, but by and large around then. And then the whole lot is finally cleared away. It's a very time-consuming process because it's very labour-intensive, but it does allow for a very broad number of flowers to flourish in grass. So it's a traditional way of managing a hay meadow.
And you've got a rose meadow.
Yes, so what we've tried to do is reinvent the traditional rose garden. Rather than have roses with a little box hedge round it, we've put big stands of roses into the long grass. So there'll be 7 or 8 roses on one clump. And the idea is that you look across these meadows and the grasses, and there's lots of activity going on in them anyway because there's butterflies and moths and bumblebees moving around in it. And above them you see this sort of haze of pale pink roses, or we've got some on climbing supports to give further height to the meadow. It's taken a bit of explanation to some people because they simply don't understand why we would have grass around the roses. To them that's just rather weedy, but to us that's the whole effect that we're trying to create, is a sort of romantic idyll.
I think I'm talking to a gardener again, aren't I?
You are indeed, yes.
And what's your name, please?
My name's Tim Metcalf-Kemp.
Where exactly are we? What am I looking at?
This is the actual walled garden, the walled part of the garden of Easton Walled Gardens. And as we're looking out in front of us, we've got the long borders. They're about 80 metres in length combined. Situated behind those, we've got the rose meadow, which is a fairly new addition. That's probably only 3 or 4 years old now. And then behind that, we've got an even sort of newer aspect, which is the fruit orchard.
Let's have a walk to the rose meadow.
Okay.
What's involved mainly? I mean, you look after all of this area, do you?
I do indeed, yes. So the long borders, basically, they're still maturing. So we've got a sort of a mixed border. And as you can see, we've got shrubs, perennials, we've got bulbs in there. And we also grow annuals as well to bolster the display throughout the season. Going into the rose meadow, still very much a work in progress because this side of the gardens is sort of the newer developed area, if you like. You can see we've got David Austin roses, a selection of those, and then in addition we've got 4 climbing structures on each side for climbing roses. Then we basically let the grass in between the rose beds develop as a meadow. And we've got spring bulbs planted into those at the minute, and we're trying to develop that into more of a wildflower meadow.
So these cross shapes, these are kept as paths?
They are, yes.
And so these triangles in between, they've got the bulbs in?
They have, yes. Yeah, and that's what you'll see as the wildflower meadow in time to come. Yeah, so in the summer, although we've cut the meadow down now, in the summer you've got long grass, so that's the informal part, with the formal sort of roses growing from those in wildflower meadows.
It's very sheltered here, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the wall offers a great degree of shelter.
And on the other side, you've got...
So the line of trees you see are actually yew trees. And when the hall was on the site, that was actually a clipped formal hedge. It stood probably 8-10 foot high. As you can see, since the site was derelict, the hedge has grown into mature trees again.
Full-size trees.
Yeah, so I think the intention is we're going to keep those because it's quite a nice aspect. When you actually walk up the yew tunnel, you can see where the hedge was clipped to. All the dead wood is still there.
How much time do you spend maintaining the look of this area here?
It takes a majority of my time. Obviously, we've got a lot of other things to do. Probably at least half of my week is spent in the walled garden, on the long borders, trying to keep those going throughout the season, really.
Is that a nice place to spend all your time?
It is. I mean, you can see we're down by the river. You can see the kingfisher fly across there quite frequently. Lovely, tranquil piece of the gardens. So, yeah, great place to work, really.
So we are standing on the banks of the River Witham now?
Yes, it doesn't quite look that big, does it? But Environment Agency have just recently been doing some work to it. You can see they've put some what they call faggots in, which is basically to shore up an area of the river, and that's shaping it so it's got quite a meandering flow.
It's got a lovely curve to it there.
Yeah, and hopefully that'll take its own structure and it'll take its own shape with the flow of the river. They've narrowed it so it's got a faster flow of water, and that'll actually, when it starts to rise and flood a bit, will actually cut into other parts of the bank and shape the river and hopefully create some pools where trout will establish.
That's beautiful. The bridge is particularly lovely.
Yes, when they started to reclaim the gardens, unfortunately there was a lot of damage done to the bridge, and it was purely from self-set trees. Things like sycamore had actually managed to get into the actual stonework and grown some considerable size and done a lot of damage to the stonework. So, of course, that had to all be unpicked and the trees removed in the roots and then rebuilt back again. But it is a fantastic walkway entrance to the walled garden.
Do you get to have your lunch down here?
I do on occasion, yes, yeah, because it is quite a tranquil place, especially with the river.
We can see a set of steps. Was that the way back to the house?
It was, yes. That was your formal sort of access leading from the walled garden and connecting the hall.
It's very impressive.
It is. You can just see there was actually a footpath that led across from the steps to the bridge. And you can see the actual patch of grass where that pathway would have led. And that did at one time have a raised walkway on it, but that was removed over time as well.
And were those terraces part of the route?
Yeah, the terraces formed sort of a big structure in the garden. They when we reclaimed the gardens, they reshaped those to how they originally were shaped in a lot of the photographs of the early 1900s.
So what did they look like in the early 1900s? Very
similar, although on the slopes we've put wildflowers in there and used that as like wildflower meadow now. In the early 1900s that was just short clipped grass. So it was as you see now. We've recreated that apart from the slopes that we use as wildflower meadows now. So it is exactly as you would have seen it in early 1900s.
So would you say that most of the visitors are gardeners?
Yes, to sort of one degree or another. Some are more advanced, some are more technically minded on the garden aspect. Others just generally, I think, like to have a walk around the gardens and enjoy the scenery, really. Although they like to do a bit of gardening, they perhaps just come and get a few small ideas and take them away with them. But others that are enthusiasts, shall we say, they probably specialise in more technical areas, so they might know more than I do probably about how to look after fruit trees, or they might specialise in something like clematis or something like that. So you can always glean bits of information as they can from me, as we can from some of the visitors at times.
Is that the most formal garden?
The vegetable garden, yes, I suppose it is really. Although we've rebuilt the kitchen garden in another part now, in the day that certainly was the more formal part. We had espaliered fruit trees around the wall structure, and inset into that we had all the fruit and vegetables that would have been raised for the house.
This looks all very interesting.
Yes.
A lot of activity. I'm in the coffee shop, and who am I talking to?
Alison.
How long have you been in here? Not today.
Gosh, it must be about a year after it opened, I think I started here.
And you're a local person, aren't you?
Yes. I was born on the estate. My father was a tenant farmer, and we moved back into the village 20 years ago.
That's the village of Easton?
Yes. Yeah.
So what's an average day like here?
It depends. Some days it can be absolute havoc, and another day it can be as quiet as this. But usually we have sort of like 2 busy weeks of the year, sweet pea week and snowdrop week, and then we have queues. And there's usually about 5 of us round the back here, and we manage. I don't know how, but we manage.
Do you do everything?
Yes, we keep it basic. We have soup of the day and jacket potatoes and baguettes with the various fillings. So we keep it simple, and most people, they come back and say how lovely the food was, which is nice.
The last time I came here, Lady Chomley was actually sitting out there having a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So that's a very good recommendation.
Yes.
So what's the most in numbers that you've ever had in here?
Oh, well, just recently we have actually beaten our lunch record, and I think it was 157.
All came for lunch?
Yes.
Did you have to have a nice lie down after that?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your father? He was a tenant farmer.
Yes, he and my mum moved up into Lincolnshire in the mid-1950s. His brother moved up first because they were all from Nottinghamshire. They sort of lived in one big house, but it was cut off down the centre, like 2 semis if you like. They farmed together as brothers, and then they've since passed away, and we moved into Easton, mid-70s I think. Yeah, we've been here ever since.
What did they farm, do you know?
It was arable and cattle and sheep, so it was a mixture.
And they did everything?
Yes.
So I've got lovely childhood memories of bringing the sheep through from that side of the park up to here to be sheared.
So your mum was a farmer's wife?
Yes, but she's from a farming family as well.
So
they all were.
Did you get your cooking skills from her then?
Well, probably.
Well, if you were a farmer's wife, you were responsible for quite a lot of things.
Oh, yes, yeah, absolutely. Mum used to stay up all night. Well, her and Dad would take in turns to go out and check that everything was all right. Yeah, it's a 24/7 job.
Here we are in the coffee shop, and I'm talking to two visitors.
Hello.
Hello. And what's your name?
I'm Mandy.
And what's your name?
Alice.
You're Alice. This is a children's summer activity sheet. Have you nearly finished?
No.
Well, you've done this bit.
Nearly done it.
What is this? What do you have to do? It's a word search.
Done two.
You've done 2. But here, it says things to do today.
Yeah.
So are you going to do some of these things?
I'm doing that.
This one, spot the birds.
That one.
Follow the wren trail.
I'm doing that one. Have we got 7?
We've got 5. Then you have to make a word.
Yeah.
And what's this bit here then?
A maze.
A maze.
Yeah.
And this says, can you help the bees find their way back to the hive? Now, do you think you're going to be able to manage that?
Yes. I've done mazes before.
What do you call a sleeping dinosaur?
I don't know.
Have you not read that bit there?
A dinosaur.
A dinosaur. and why don't elephants like playing cards in the jungle?
Because of all the cheaters.
I'm in the admissions centre and the gift shop at Easton Wall Gardens. I'm talking to Amanda.
I think the best thing is actually seeing people. It's having people coming and going and being able to greet them with a big smile and then being happy to leave and enjoy the gardens, actually.
Now, I seem to be standing in an interesting place. What am I seeing in front of me now?
You're standing in front of the vegetable garden, which is a series of raised beds on a sloping site. And we built this some 4 years ago now, and it is very productive every year. Supplies a huge amount of stuff for the tea room during the summer months, and then winter vegetables for soups and vegetables for the family.
And what's your name?
Nick.
You're the vegetable garden gardener.
Yes, that's correct.
So you're responsible for all of this?
Yes, for the
How
vegetable
long
gardens
have you
here.
been here, Nick?
I've been on this site for 10 years, since it was just a blank canvas, and I've worked in between here and the Chumley's own garden ever since.
So how many gardeners were there at that stage at the beginning?
At the beginning there was just myself and the senior gardener, Steve Marsland, who is a plantsman, and then myself to do some of the labouring work.
And I notice you've got gardener's kit on. What have you got strapped around your legs?
I've got kneelers. I'm not one of the youngest gardeners, and therefore I'm looking after my knees.
Would you say this is a major attraction in the gardens?
In this day and age, there's very much an emphasis on allotments and people growing their own. Therefore, it does create an area of interest for visitors to the garden.
Do you give out tips?
If I'm here working at the time, it's very easy to get into discussion with other vegetable gardeners, yes.
Nick, this is a sloping site. These are almost like terraces.
It's done that way. We used seasoned oak timbers to form 4 semi-raised beds to give us easy working of each bed. If you make them, they're about 4 to 5 feet wide, you can work them from either side and the soil stays in place. Being a sloping site, if you just had it open without the sleepers, you would have got erosion and slippage.
And you're getting a bit used to all this media attention, aren't you? Weren't you in a magazine recently?
I have recently been in the magazine along with Lady Chumley, featuring the whole of the garden, yes.
Which magazine was that?
That was Kitchen Garden. The editor lives in Grantham, I believe.
So how much time a week do you spend on a plot this size?
At this time of year, 1 day a week will suffice to keep it tidy and take out stuff that's gone over, etc., because there's no new plantings very much at this time of year.
But you'll still be harvesting all through the
we'll
week?
Still be harvesting, yes. Yes, we've got leeks here to harvest, we've got parsnips, carrots, chard, and we've still got lettuce we can harvest.
In this vegetable garden, you've also got banks of sweet peas.
We have, yes. We grow sweet peas on this site as well because we have a lot of varieties of sweet peas for our sweet pea week, etc. We grow them in among with the vegetables.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
One thing that makes the garden is not just the flowers, it's the movement through the meadows and the garden and the trees. And I don't mean necessarily the wind, although that's something. It's the movement of swallows, particularly if they're flying low, and it's the movement of butterflies and seeing a large hatch of butterflies. So you suddenly will see 8 or 10 comma butterflies, for instance, have suddenly hatched. And one thing that we've been doing for a couple of months now is working with the Environment Agency and the Wild Trout Trust to improve the habitat in the river for crayfish, because there's native crayfish in the upper reaches of the River Witham, and things like bullheads, and of course for the trout. And the bed had become very full of silt, so you've got this very flat, sluggish river coming through the gardens. When I say river, most people know in this area that the River Witham is fairly small here. Well, it's as you come upstream from Grantham, it gets smaller and smaller. So by here, it's spring-fed. So the springs popping up all the way down its route. So at times it's little more than a stream, but give a big fall of rain, it will flood the whole lower part of the garden. And then, of course, it dumps a lot of silt, and then the river is made unfriendly towards these creatures that could live happily in the river. So the Environment Agency cut a lot of hazel from coppiced woodland, which is again very good for wildlife, bundled it up and have then laid it along the edge of the river to force the flow to narrow and therefore be faster, take the silt away, and then you get these gravel beds, which are much better for the creatures to live in. And the improvement has been dramatic, really quite quickly, and it's a very interesting project to be involved with.
You have won several awards here, haven't you?
Yes, we won 2 awards. One is we were recognised as a national treasure by Alan Titchmarsh on the Alan Titchmarsh show for the work we'd done, which was an amazing experience. And we also won Lincolnshire Visitor Attraction of the Year.
And it's a film location here as well, isn't it?
Yes, sporadically we're used as a film location. When we first started the gardens, there was a programme on the BBC which was trying to find the greatest Britain the country had ever had. Isaac Newton was in the top 10, so they wanted to film obviously at Woolsthorpe Manor. And we're only 2 miles away as the crow flies from Woolsthorpe Manor. So they came here and they filmed coaches going backwards and forwards as if it was Isaac Newton going backwards and forwards to his house.
You've got a wonderful coach house here.
Yes.
Is that a venue for groups, and what sort of events do you have?
We've got this amazing coach house which was really saved from dereliction. It had no roof on it at all when we first started looking at doing the project, and there was a big ash tree growing out of it, and the top floor had all collapsed in onto the bottom floor, and you could still see the beams, the great big beams that held up the roof are still open, and you can see where the water damage got in now that we've repaired the building. And we've got 3 rooms that we hire out there that accommodate anything from 10 to 50 people. And we do all sorts of events. We do very low-key wedding receptions. We've done a wake, we've done a christening, and then we use it for groups and people who want to celebrate maybe an anniversary. And then we use it a lot for our workshops. So twice a year we run workshop weeks in the spring and in the autumn, where people come and do craft activities. This year we've got rag rugging, chocolate making, stained glass skills, what else have we got? Willow weaving, various art-based courses, and then some gardening courses, rose pruning, looking after your garden, those sort of courses. And it's very popular with our members who are friends of the garden. They basically buy a season ticket. It's very good value, and that entitles you to come to the gardens as many times as you like through the season. So if you live locally, you visit 3 times, you've already really paid for it. When I first started this project, my children were very small, and I used to visit a lot of gardens because I was trying to get ideas. And the one thing that used to be very difficult is that we would take the children with us, and they'd have a lovely time in the adventure playground, and then we'd have about 10 minutes left to rush around the garden because they were like, no, I don't want to go, I'm enjoying the swings, I'm enjoying whatever. So what we've really tried to do in the gardens, because it's so big, is to integrate the children's visit into the adults' visit. As the family go round the garden, for instance on the south lawn there's lots of balls to kick around, then you get to the swing, and then you can see the big giraffe sculptures, and then maybe come and do the turf maze. Children are very welcome to pick a few flowers, and we say that to them when they come in. Horticulture and having contact with nature is very, very important for children today, and so we really feel that we want them to sort of run around and not worry too much if they break into a shrubbery or something. And we have a bird hide where you can watch birds with some feeders. And then the long yew tunnel is very popular. It's very spooky and
very atmospheric.
Very atmospheric. And we do a little wren trail for them. So we have these wren boxes boxes that are hidden around the gardens, and when they find a wren box, they open it up and there's a little stamp inside it, and they've got a piece of paper they've picked up when they came in. They stamp a letter onto each square of their sheet, and when they've got all the letters, it makes a word, and they bring it back to admissions and they get a certificate for completing them all. And just really the idea is to keep the children moving from thing to things while the parents are able to enjoy the garden at the same time.
That's a wonderful idea. You have special programmes in school holidays as well, don't you?
Yeah, we do. I mean, nothing too formal, but for instance, in the autumn, we always have pumpkin rolling in the autumn half term. So we get in about 150 pumpkins, and children come and they throw the pumpkins down the terraces, which of course the meadows have all been cut by then and cleared. The furthest one wins, and occasionally you had a father who does it who will manage to get it into the river. But if your pumpkin breaks, or you don't throw it underarm, or it doesn't reach the top terrace, then you're immediately disqualified.
What else do you offer the visitors to Easton Walled Gardens?
Well, we have visitors who come 4 days a week. We're open Wednesday to Friday and Sundays, 11 until 4. We also welcome groups throughout the year, and that can be formal groups who come on coaches, or it can be family gatherings. And we have 2 shops here and a courtyard area for plant sales. And we sell some lovely plants. I mean, being so close to some of the greatest areas of plant growing in Europe, i.e. the Lincolnshire Fens, we're very fortunate that we can get some lovely plants in at good prices. And we also tend to grow some things ourselves that people ask for in the gardens, and then the things we're not able to offer as plants we sell as seed, and we have an online shop for that, which you can order from at www.shop@easton.co.uk. And yeah, we're open from February until the end of October.
Many thanks to Ursula Lady Chomley, Mary McKinley, Landy Hosley, Stephen Marsland, Tim Metcalf-Kemp, Nick Dolby and Alison at Easton Walled Gardens. Thank you too to the visitors Mandy and the lovely Alice, and not forgetting Ian Hempsell and Ella Watts of Gravity FM.
The local history feature is brought to you by Gravity FM in association with Your Heritage, awarding funds from the National Lottery. See www.hlf.org.uk.